I used to believe that love could conquer anything. That as long as I gave everything of myself, my heart, my loyalty, my time, it would always come back to me. I believed in him, in my husband. I believed in us. His name was Adrian. To the world, he was charming, successful, and undeniably charismatic. To me, he was everything: my safe place, my home, my reason to smile. From the moment we met, I thought we were destined to be. Our love story, I believed, was the kind that would withstand storms, trials, betrayals. Anything but life, as I was about to learn, had other plans. It started subtly, as most tragedies do. The small things at first: messages on his phone that he would hastily hide, late nights at the office that weren't quite at the office, unexplained absences, excuses that made sense only if I didn't think too hard. I had trusted him so completely that I convinced myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. Love, I realized too late, has a way of blinding you. The day it all changed, Adrian didn't bother hiding anything. It was a Tuesday morning. The kind of crisp autumn morning where the sun pierces through the windows just enough to make everything look golden and peaceful. I was making us coffee in our kitchen, humming softly, when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It was a photo. A woman. A beautiful woman, lying pale and frail in a hospital bed. Tubes running from her arms. Machines beeping softly in rhythm with the shallow rise and fall of her chest. My heart stopped, and then I saw the caption: "He's calling you. Do what he says." At first I froze. My mind scrambled. My husband. What had he done? Who was she? And most importantly, what did I have to do with any of this? I tried calling Adrian immediately. No answer. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the message, trying to find any clue, any context. That's when the truth hit me like a thunderclap. Adrian had a mistress. Not just any mistress. This was the woman who had been lying in wait, the woman I had never known existed, the woman he had secretly loved, or thought he loved. And now she was dying. I felt a surge of nausea. My hands trembling. My world, my life, the foundation of everything I had believed in, was crumbling before my eyes. It didn't take long for him to call. His voice was calm, cold, unnervingly casual. "I need you to save her," he said, as if he were ordering groceries instead of demanding that I risk my life for a woman who had taken everything from me. I couldn't speak. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to tell him he was insane. But I didn't. Instead, I listened, numbly, as he explained the situation. There had been an accident, a car crash, and the woman was in critical condition. Only my knowledge, only my abilities, could save her. Only me. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to tell him to go to hell. I wanted to walk away and never look back. But something inside me froze, something darker than shock, colder than fear. Because in that moment, I realized just how much control he had over me. He had always known me. Not the me that smiled, laughed, or cried. The me that would do anything for love. That me he held in his hand, fragile and pliable. "Do it," he said simply, his voice firm, unyielding. "Or don't expect me to forgive you." I swallowed hard. Forgive me. He had already betrayed me. Betrayed everything we had. And yet, I felt the weight of his expectation pressing down on me like a physical force. I was trapped not by chains, but by the illusion of loyalty, by the love I still had for a man who didn't deserve it. I didn't respond. I just hung up. my hand shaking so violently that the phone slipped from my grip and clattered to the floor. I sank to the kitchen tiles, my mind spinning in a whirlwind of anger, fear, disbelief and a strange, unbidden thought. If he thinks I will follow his orders blindly, he's about to learn a very painful lesson. I had always been obedient, gentle, forgiving, but there was a limit to everything. And he had crossed it. Later that day, I found myself walking through the hospital doors, the smell of antiseptic and faint perfume filling my senses. The corridors were eerily quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead amplifying the pounding of my heart. And there she was, the woman who had stolen his heart, lying helpless, pale, fragile. I stared at her, and for a moment I felt nothing. Not hatred, not pity, not fear. Just a quiet, simmering fire of determination. Adrian's instructions echoed in my mind. Save her. She's critical. She won't survive without you. I looked down at my own hands, trembling slightly. Hands that had held love, nurtured life, and now were being asked to save the very thing that had destroyed me. I thought of him. Adrian, my husband, the man I had trusted blindly. And a dark, unspoken thought took root in my heart. If he thinks I will do this willingly, he doesn't know me at all. That night, I sat by her bedside, monitoring her vitals, administering medication, adjusting machines. Every beep, every flutter of her fragile pulse was a reminder of the delicate balance of life and of the power I held in my hands. I didn't look at Adrian when he visited. He expected gratitude, submission, maybe even some twisted sense of admiration. But all I felt was a slow burning fire, a desire for justice, a plan beginning to take shape, because saving her didn't mean obeying him. Saving her didn't mean I was weak. Saving her meant I had the perfect opportunity for revenge, and I would take it. I leaned back in my chair, watching the rhythm of her breathing, imagining the game I was about to play. He thought he controlled me. He thought I would bend, kneel and obey. But he had underestimated one thing, me. I was no longer just the wife he had manipulated. I was a force he couldn't contain. And the story was about to change, starting with her. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital before dawn. The quiet hum of machines and the antiseptic scent greeted me like old, unwelcome friends. She was still there, pale, fragile, barely clinging to life but breathing. My heart twisted in a strange way. Part of me wanted to leave, to walk out and never look back. But I didn't. Adrian was waiting in the corridor, leaning casually against the wall, phone in hand. His expression was a mask of charm and calm. But there was something darker lurking beneath. Something I had never truly seen before. She's stable, I said quietly. Avoiding his gaze. Good, he said, almost approvingly. His eyes flicked toward her hospital bed, then back at me. You've done what I asked. Don't forget, without you, she wouldn't be here. And neither would I. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms. I wanted to shout, to tell him exactly what I thought of him, of her, of the entire cruel world he had dragged me into. But I didn't. I had learned long ago that anger in the wrong place could be deadly. Instead, I smiled, a small, controlled smile that he mistook for obedience. And that was the first weapon in my arsenal. I would pretend. I would obey. But everything I did, everything I let him see, would be calculated. The mistress. Her name was Elena. I had learned it from the nurse's chart. She was younger, beautiful, and exuded an effortless charm even in weakness. The kind of charm that had ensnared Adrian so easily. Watching her lie there, helpless, I felt a strange cocktail of emotions: anger, disgust, even a faint flicker of pity, but most of all, I felt power. The power of choice. He thought I would save her out of love, or fear, or guilt. He thought I would bend to his will. But he didn't know me. Not really. Not anymore. Over the next few days, I followed his orders meticulously. I administered medication, monitored her vitals, adjusted machines, and documented everything. I kept my distance, my emotions carefully contained behind a mask of dutiful obedience. Adrian watched me like a hawk, as if my every expression, every twitch of my eye, was a code he could decipher. "You're doing well," he said one evening, leaning against the doorframe as I adjusted info drip. "I always knew you were capable. You just needed a situation that tested you." I forced a small nod. I want her to live, of course," he said smoothly, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "And that's exactly why you're the one I chose. You understand the stakes." The stakes? That word echoed in my mind long after he left. He wanted control. He wanted gratitude. He wanted me to feel indebted, weak, trapped. But I had already begun to untangle the web. I had already begun to plan. Each time I tended to Elena, I observed her. Not just medically, though I followed every procedure, every protocol, but personally. I noted her weaknesses, her reactions, her subtle fears. She was cunning, yes, but inexperienced. She relied on charm and manipulation, not true strategy. That would be her downfall. I also watched Adrian. How easily he was manipulated by desire, by obsession. How predictable he had become in his need to control. His arrogance was his weakness, and I intended to exploit it. One evening, as I adjusted her oxygen mask, Elena opened her eyes. They were sharp, assessing, dangerous even in weakness. She looked at me and smiled faintly. "So, you're the one keeping me alive," she whispered, her voice soft but pointed. "How?" "Admirable." I didn't answer. I just nodded slightly, maintaining my mask of professionalism. I would not give her the satisfaction of fear. "Don't think you're safe either," she added, a faint smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "He'll come for you eventually. Everyone serves a purpose, you know." I froze for a moment. Her words were meant to intimidate, to unsettle me. But instead, they sparked a thought, a thrill of strategy. She didn't know me. She didn't know that I could see through her, that I could turn every move against her, that I was already several steps ahead. The next day, Adrian arrived with the same cold confidence, as if nothing had changed. "She's stable. Good work. But remember, this isn't just about keeping her alive, it's about loyalty. About proving yourself." I smiled again, small and measured. Inside, a fire burned. Loyalty? Proof? He would get neither. He would get something else entirely. I began subtle maneuvers, little things that seemed innocent, but carried potential consequences. Slight delays in adjusting medications, conversations carefully overheard and misrepresented, small observations recorded and mentally catalogued. Every detail could be a weapon. Adrian remained blissfully unaware. He was blind to my intentions, blind to the storm brewing behind my calm exterior. He assumed that fear and obligation had me under his control. He assumed that I would bend. He was wrong, and as I watched him leave that evening, the corridor emptying into silence, I whispered to myself, a promise I knew I would keep. "You wanted obedience. You wanted me to save her for you. But I'll save her on my terms. And when the time comes, You'll see the consequences of underestimating me. The first seeds of revenge had been planted. They would grow slowly, carefully, and when they did, the world he thought he controlled would crumble beneath him. For now, I played the role of the dutiful wife. But the night was mine, and in it, I plotted. I planned. I waited, and I was ready. Days passed like a delicate, poisonous dance. Adrian came and went, checking on Elena, issuing instructions, reminding me of my so-called duty as if obedience could erase betrayal. I continued my fard calm, professional, dutiful, but every small action, every glance, every word I spoke was part of a strategy only I fully understood. Elena's recovery was slow, deliberate, almost theatrical. She had the charm and cunning of someone who had always gotten what she wanted. Even in weakness, she tried to assert control over the room. She would flutter her eyes at Adrian, whisper manipulative words I pretended not to hear, let out a soft laugh when he hovered too close. He adored her, hung on her every word, and that was precisely what made him predictable. One evening, I arrived just as Adrian left, a smug smile on his face. I paused at the doorway, watching Elena struggle to lift herself slightly in the bed. Her eyes met mine, sharp and challenging. "You're quite competent," she said, voice low and almost teasing. "I wonder if you really want to be here or if you're just pretending." I held her gaze evenly, my mask of calm unbroken. "Pretending can be useful," I said softly, letting the words hang between us. "Sometimes it's the only way to survive." She tilted her head, a faint smirk forming. "Ah, survival. Clever. But cleverness alone won't save you, you know." Her words should have shaken me, but instead, they fueled something darker within me. Cleverness, yes, but strategy, patience, foresight. That was where I held the advantage. I had time. I had knowledge. I had control over the details. And most importantly, she underestimated me, just like Adrian. That night, as I tended to her medications, I began my first small acts of calculated defiance. Nothing that would harm her yet. Only minor manipulations, slight adjustments to her schedule, subtle omissions, controlled mistakes that seemed accidental but hinted at incompetence or vulnerability. Each act was invisible to Adrian, untraceable, but it planted seeds of doubt and fear in Elena. I was careful. Every movement, every decision was deliberate. I wasn't cruel, I was strategic. I would play the long game. By the fourth day, Elena's recovery had progressed just enough for her to speak more freely. She leaned slightly on the bed rails, her voice sharp. "You think he values you," she said, eyes narrowing. "But really, you're just a tool to him. Nothing more. Do you feel it yet? The way he watches you, tests you, controls you?" I didn't respond immediately. Her insight was accurate, but only partially. Adrian had underestimated me, yes, but she had no idea how far I had already thought ahead. "I feel enough," I said finally, my voice steady. "Enough to know that I am not powerless." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise passing over her features. For the first time, I saw doubt enter her carefully constructed fard. That doubt would grow, slowly, until it became her undoing. Adrian's next visit brought the predictable tension. He was confident, charming, in control, or so he thought. "She's recovering nicely," he said, glancing at Elena, his hand brushing over hers, with practiced intimacy. "Thanks to you," I nodded, careful to maintain the appearance of loyalty. "Of course," I said softly. But inside, I smiled at the thought of how wrong he was. That night, I began keeping a mental log of every interaction, small habits, vulnerabilities, strengths, weaknesses. Every smile, every sigh, every glance could be turned into leverage later. I was building a map of control, not through brute force, but through subtle manipulation. And then came the first real test. Adrian called late, a strained edge to his usual calm tone. "She's asking for something," he said. "A request. Make sure she gets it immediately." I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew what it meant. Elena wanted to see how far she could push me, to test my boundaries, to assert her power. And that was exactly what I had been waiting for. I arrived at her bedside and watched her carefully. She was smiling faintly, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I heard you might have options," she said softly, her voice teasing, dangerous. "I wonder if you'll do exactly what Adrian wants, or if you'll surprise us all." I leaned closer, my expression calm, almost gentle. "Surprises can be enlightening," I whispered, letting the words carry weight. "They can change everything." She stared at me for a long moment, then smiled, uncertain now, as if sensing a shift in the dynamics he thought she controlled. That night, I returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. The first pieces of my plan were in motion. Adrian still believed he controlled me. Elena still believed she had influence. Both of them were blind to the storm I was carefully orchestrating behind the mask of obedience. I poured myself a glass of wine, sitting by the window as the city lights flickered below. The night was quiet, the world oblivious to the silent battle unfolding in a hospital room. And I whispered to myself, a promise and a warning both: "This is only the beginning. Let them think they are in control. Let them believe they can manipulate me. When the time comes, they will realize that I have been the one leading the game all along." The first moves had been made. The board was set. And in this dangerous game of love, betrayal and revenge, I was ready to play. The hospital room had become a stage, and every day I played my role perfectly. Adrian believed I was obedient. Elena believed she could manipulate me, and I held the quiet power of foresight. I had learned that revenge was not about anger or impulse, it was about strategy, patience, and timing. Elena's health improved enough for her to sit up and move with some independence. Her eyes, once sharp and confident even in weakness, now betrayed tiny cracks of vulnerability. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands when she reached for a glass, the hesitation in her voice when she addressed Adrian, the almost imperceptible tension in her jaw, and I catalogued it all. "You're very careful," she whispered one evening, her voice low, almost admiring. "You don't let anything slip, do you?" I smiled faintly, a mask of calm. "Carefulness is necessary when lives are at stake," I said. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were trying to read me, to find any hint of weakness, even mine. She asked, a faint edge of curiosity in her tone. I let the silence linger, letting her imagination fill in the blanks. Every hesitation, every pause, was part of the game. Power, I had learned, could be wielded silently, invisibly, like water carving stone. Adrian continued to hover, his visits becoming more frequent as Elena's recovery progressed. His obsession was thinly disguised as concern. But I saw the truth. He was addicted to control. And his control was slipping, just slightly. Without him noticing, one afternoon, as I adjusted her full line, Elena spoke again. Softer this time, almost confiding. "Do you think he really loves me? Or am I just a convenient distraction?" I froze slightly, choosing my words carefully. Love is complicated, I said. Sometimes, people confuse desire with affection or control with attachment. Her eyes met mine, sharp and calculating. Are you saying you know the difference? I smiled, small and measured. I suppose I do. She leaned back slightly, clearly unsettled. For the first time, I sensed that the balance of power was shifting. She had underestimated me, not just my intelligence, but my patience, my ability to wait for the perfect moment. That night, I stayed later than usual, monitoring her vitals, adjusting medications, making notes. Every detail mattered. Every small observation, every flicker of emotion could be used to manipulate events in my favor. I began to weave small psychological traps, subtle suggestions and calculated interactions designed to destabilize both Elena and Adrian. It began with simple things. A misplaced note that she would find, suggesting Adrian's attention was wavering. A whispered comment, meant to make her doubt her own charm. Small, almost invisible acts, but they planted seeds of uncertainty. Adrian noticed nothing. He continued to give orders, to issue reminders, to check on progress with his usual overconfidence. He believed the situation was under control, that his mistress's life and his manipulation of me was perfectly aligned, but he was wrong. By the 5th day, Elena's confidence began to waver. She questioned her own influence, hesitated in her interactions with Adrian, and even looked to me with subtle unease. It was intoxicating to see the first cracks appear in her carefully constructed facade, and it was only the beginning. I spent hours that night planning the next phase of my strategy. I had learned that revenge was not instantaneous. It required careful timing, patience and precision. I was ready to escalate, to begin turning Adrian's own obsession and Elena's insecurities against them both. I whispered to myself, a vow and a promise. Let them think they are in control. Let them believe they can manipulate me. Soon, they will realize that the only one truly in control is me. The storm was coming. And when it did, there would be no mercy, no forgiveness, and no escape. By now, the hospital had become a battlefield of silent strategies and invisible power plays. I moved through the space with purpose, each step calculated, each word chosen with precision. Adrian believed I was a dutiful wife performing a moral obligation. Elena believed she could charm and manipulate her way back into power. And both of them were dangerously wrong. I began to notice small weaknesses I could exploit. Elena, for all her cunning, had a fragile ego that needed constant reassurance. Adrian, for all his arrogance, had a predictable pattern. He rewarded obedience and punished deviation, and he thrived on control. Both of these weaknesses could be turned into weapons. One morning, as I entered the room, I noticed Elena frowning at a chart beside her bed. Do you really understand all of this? I asked, my voice calm, almost conversational. She glanced at me, irritation flickering across her face. Of course I do. Why wouldn't I? Because even a small mistake could be dangerous, I said softly, letting my words linger like a shadow. You're recovering, yes, but every detail matters. Especially when someone is watching. Her eyes narrowed. She understood immediately that I wasn't threatening her physically. I was threatening her control, her influence, her confidence. And that, I knew, could be far more devastating. Adrian arrived later that afternoon, just as I had predicted. His presence was magnetic, as always, but also suffocating. He moved to Elena's side, brushing a strand of hair from her face with that familiar mix of tenderness and ownership. She is improving, he said, looking at me with a faint smile. Thanks to you, I nodded, careful to maintain my composure. Of course, I replied, letting the tone carry a subtle hint of neutrality. No gratitude, no fear, no loyalty. Just observation. As he left, I noticed Elena watching him go, a flicker of doubt passing through her eyes. My subtle remarks, the small seeds of uncertainty I had planted over the past days, were beginning to take root. That night, I made my next calculated move. I intentionally misaligned a minor medication schedule, just enough to create slight discomfort, not enough to harm, but enough to make her feel unstable. I watched carefully as she struggled to adjust, her confidence wavering. "I'm not as strong as I thought," she murmured to herself, frustration creeping into her voice. Why is she always precise? I didn't respond. I let her realize it on her own. Let her feel the weight of her own fragility. This was how power was gained, through patience, precision, and understanding the weaknesses of those around you. The next day, Adrian returned, visibly pleased with the progress. "You've done well," he said, leaning against the doorway with that self-satisfied smirk. "I knew I could rely on you." I smiled faintly, neutral, obedient, but inside, I was already 3 steps ahead. His praise only fueled my strategy. I would use his trust against him, just as I had begun to destabilize Elena. That evening, I began subtle manipulations of another kind, small conversations with Elena designed to create paranoia. Innocent remarks like, "Are you sure he's as committed as you think?" Or sometimes people's loyalties aren't what they appear. Her eyes flickered, uncertainty creeping in where confidence had once resided. And I knew the longer this went on, the deeper the fissures would become. Adrian, of course, remained oblivious. His obsession blinded him, making him predictable, manipulable, and vulnerable. And I was ready to exploit it fully. As I left the hospital that night, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. Not fear, not anger, not revenge, but control. For the first time, I realized that I was no longer merely responding to his manipulations. I was shaping the game, moving the pieces, and directing the outcome. And soon, both Adrian and Elena would learn the hard truth. I was no longer the obedient wife, the manipulated lover, or the convenient caretaker. I was a force they had underestimated, and underestimating me would be their undoing. By now, the dynamics in the hospital room had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. Adrian still believed he was in control. Elena still believed she had influence. But the truth was becoming clearer with each passing day. I was no longer a pawn. I was the player. I began observing them, not just individually, but in how they interacted, the micro-expressions, the hesitations, the small betrayals hidden in gestures and tones. Adrian's obsession with Elena made him blind to her faltering confidence, while Elena's attempts to manipulate me were being met with quiet, deliberate resistance. One afternoon, as I adjusted Elena's bedding, she tried again. A faint challenge in her tone. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she said, eyes sharp, playing both sides, pretending to care. I let out a soft, almost amused sigh, leaning closer. "Cleverness is one thing. Awareness is another," I said. "And right now, I think I'm the only one fully aware of what's happening." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of fear or maybe recognition passing through them. That small moment delighted me. The first real sign that my subtle manipulations were beginning to disrupt her composure. Adrian arrived shortly afterward, his usual aura of control masking his growing frustration. He watched me tend to Elena, his eyes flicking between us like a hawk. Keep a close eye on her, he instructed, a thinly veiled threat hidden beneath the veneer of concern. I nodded politely. Of course, I said, hiding the satisfaction bubbling inside me. Every command he gave, every expectation he placed, was being woven into the strategy I had been carefully constructing. That night, I implemented the next phase, emotional manipulation. I allowed Elena to overhear a stage conversation, intentionally misphrased, hinting that Adrian might be reconsidering his loyalties, that she wasn't as essential to him as she believed. He thinks you're indispensable, I whispered quietly while adjusting her monitor. But even the indispensable can be replaced. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of doubt passing through them. I let the words linger in the air, subtle enough to be plausible, but powerful enough to unsettle her. She had been so focused on controlling everything around her that she had forgotten one fundamental truth. Perception is reality. And I was shaping her perception. The following morning, Adrian arrived looking unusually tense. His composure was slightly off, just enough that I noticed. Elena's confidence had begun to waver, and his obsession with control was making him predictable, making him vulnerable. She's different, he muttered to me as we walked down the corridor, his voice quieter than usual. More independent than I thought. Sometimes independence can be useful, I said softly, a small smile playing at my lips. Even for someone like her. Adrian didn't respond, but I could see the unease flickering in his expression. That was my goal, to create a subtle imbalance, to start shifting the power dynamics in my favor. By midweek, Elena was struggling more visibly. Small mistakes, minor hesitations, uncertainty in her speech, it was all part of the plan I had set into motion. I continued to monitor every heartbeat, every glance, every movement. Every detail was a lever, and soon I would begin to pull them all. I also began planting seeds of doubt in Adrian's mind, carefully and invisibly. Casual remarks, innocuous observations, subtle hints enough to make him question Elena's loyalty without realizing the source of the unease. I watched him fidget, hesitate, and double-check her every action, and I smiled, quietly to myself. This was no longer just about obedience or survival. This was about strategy, patience, and ultimately, revenge. That night, as I left the hospital and walked through the empty streets, the cool air brushing my face, I felt a sense of exhilaration. The storm I had been preparing was no longer a distant promise, it was building momentum. And soon it would strike with precision, I whispered to the night. A vow that resonated deep within me. They think they can manipulate me. They think they control the outcome. But when the time comes, they will see just how powerful I have become. The game had changed. And this time, I was the one holding all the pieces. By now, the hospital had become a delicate chessboard. Every interaction, every word, every glance carried weight. Adrian still thought he controlled the narrative. Elena still believed she could charm her way back into power. And I was no longer playing to survive, I was playing to win. It was late afternoon when the opportunity finally presented itself. Elena had grown overconfident. She leaned on her newfound mobility to test me, to challenge me, to assert dominance over the space I carefully curated. She did not realize how fragile her position had become. "Do you think he notices me?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "I'm the reason he's here, after all." I tilted my head slightly, letting the silence speak. "He notices a lot," I replied softly, "but noticing isn't the same as understanding." Her confident smirk faltered for the briefest moment. I had planted doubt in her mind before, but this time I pushed it further, planting uncertainty in the place she least expected her own intuition. Adrian arrived shortly after, his usual charm masking a subtle tension. His gaze lingered on her, on me, on the dynamics between us. I noticed the way he adjusted his posture slightly, the way his hand clenched ever so faintly around his phone. His obsession with control was now becoming a vulnerability. "Everything is stable," I said smoothly, standing near Elena. "She's responding well to treatment." Adrian nodded, distractedly. "Good. Keep monitoring her closely," he instructed. As soon as he left, I turned to Elena, letting my voice drop just slightly, intimate and controlled. "You're doing well." But even the smallest mistake could change everything. Her eyes flickered, uncertainty creeping in. For the first time, I saw her confidence truly waver. She had underestimated me. She had assumed that my compliance was weakness. But I had been building strength, strategy, and patience, and now the first strike was ready. That night, I enacted my plan. I subtly altered her schedule and medication just enough to create discomfort, not enough to cause harm, but enough to make her feel the limits of her control. Every beep of the monitor, every flutter of her pulse, became a reminder of the delicate balance of life and the power I held. "Why is this happening?" she whispered to herself, panic creeping in. "I don't understand." I remained calm, observing silently. Her fear was a tool now. Her doubt was a weapon in my hands. The next morning, Adrian returned, noticeably tense. He noticed her discomfort immediately and looked at me with that subtle edge of worry that betrayed his usually unshakable confidence. "Is she okay?" he asked, his tone slightly sharper than usual. "She's fine," I said, neutral. "Just adjusting. Everything is under control." But inside, I smiled. The first real crack had appeared in their dynamic. Elena's manipulations had backfired, leaving her unsure, anxious, and increasingly dependent on my guidance. Adrian's obsession with control was now being tested, and he did not realize that I was orchestrating it all. Over the next few days, I carefully intensified my actions, like delays in responding to her requests, subtle hints that Adrian's attention might be shifting, quiet observations that cast doubt on her influence. Each act was deliberate, invisible to the untrained eye, but powerful enough to destabilize both of them. One evening, as I prepared to leave the hospital, Elena looked at me with genuine fear in her eyes. You're not what I thought," she admitted quietly. I can't control this." I allowed a faint smile to curve my lips, calm and measured. "Control is an illusion," I said softly. "And illusions can be shattered." That night, I walked home with a sense of exhilaration I had not felt in years. The first strike had landed, invisible but devastating. Both Adrian and Elena were now playing on my board, moving pieces they did not realize were already controlled. I whispered into the darkness, a promise and a warning intertwined. They thought they were in control. They believed they could manipulate me. Soon, they will understand that the only one truly controlling this story is me. The first move had been made. The game had begun in earnest. And this time, there would be no mercy. By now, the hospital felt less like a place of healing and more like a stage for a carefully orchestrated play. I had learned every detail, every habit, every fear, every insecurity, and I was ready to use them all. Adrian's obsession with control made him predictable. Elena's overconfidence made her vulnerable. And I I was no longer hiding behind obedience. I was the one directing the narrative. That morning, I noticed Elena shifting nervously in her bed, her eyes darting toward the door as though expecting Adrian to appear at any moment. The subtle adjustments I had made in her routine were working. She was beginning to doubt her own influence, questioning not just Adrian's loyalty, but her own ability to command attention. "You look tense," I said softly, leaning closer as I checked her full line. Her eyes widened slightly, betraying the unease she tried to hide. I don't know why," she muttered, voice faltering. "Maybe I'm just tired." I smiled faintly, letting the words hang in the air. Sometimes fatigue is just the mind realizing it isn't in control. Her gaze lingered on me, unsure, tentative. That was exactly what I wanted. Doubt was a weapon, and she was already under its sway. Adrian arrived later, looking unusually tense. He scanned the room with a sharp, almost desperate glance. He approached Elena's bedside, brushing a hand over her arm, a gesture of concern, or was it ownership? I couldn't tell, and that ambiguity worked in my favor. "She seems unsettled," he muttered, his voice tight. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is under control," I replied smoothly, neutral. But inside, I was already moving pieces on the board. This was the moment to escalate. That evening, I executed the first part of my major plan. I subtly hinted to Elena that Adrian's attention might be divided, that his loyalty was not as absolute as she believed. Carefully crafted remarks, seemingly innocent observations, were designed to sow paranoia. Sometimes, I whispered while adjusting her bedding, "People's attention can shift when you least expect it. It doesn't mean they care less, it just means priorities change." Her eyes widened, the first real flicker of fear visible. She tried to mask it, but I saw it clearly. And that was the key. Fear, doubt, insecurity, all tools I could now wield with precision. Over the next day, Adrian's behavior shifted subtly. He became more cautious, more vigilant, more controlling. He didn't realize he was reacting to my manipulations, to the subtle seeds of doubt I had planted in Elena's mind. His obsession, his need for control, had made him predictable, and now I was using that predictability against him. Then came the twist, the moment that would tip the balance further. I arranged a situation where Adrian entered the room just as Elena's anxiety peaked. She faltered, misstepped, and for the first time, he saw her vulnerability. "What's happening?" he demanded, his voice sharp, a mixture of concern and frustration. "Nothing," she stammered, her confident facade crumbling. But I knew better. And in that moment, I allowed a small, controlled slip, a whispered comment, just enough for Adrian to catch, suggesting that Elena had been less than honest with him. His eyes widened, the first real cracks appearing in his composed exterior. The power dynamics shifted subtly but decisively. Elena's confidence was shaken. Adrian's control was questioned. And I remained calm, obedient, and professional, all while quietly steering the narrative. That night, I left the hospital feeling a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. The first major twist had hit its mark. Both Adrian and Elena were now vulnerable in ways they had never anticipated. And I was ready for the next phase. "They think they control me," I whispered to the darkness. "They think they can manipulate the outcome. Soon they will see the truth. And the consequences will be theirs alone." The trap was set. The pieces were in motion. And the storm I had promised was no longer a distant threat, it was here. And it was coming for them both. The air in the hospital felt charged, almost electric. I could sense the tension radiating from both Adrian and Elena. The first cracks had appeared, and now it was time to widen them into chasms. Every word, every glance, every small movement I made was calculated to destabilize the delicate balance they thought they controlled. Elena had grown visibly uneasy. She second-guessed her own actions, hesitated before speaking, and even avoided Adrian's gaze. I let her falter, never offering help unless it was strategically necessary. Every moment of uncertainty I could create in her mind was a victory. Adrian, on the other hand, began displaying subtle signs of obsession turned paranoia. He watched every interaction between Elena and me, questioned her motives, and even checked on her multiple times in ways that bordered on anxious. His need for control was becoming a liability, a flaw I could exploit. That afternoon, I decided it was time to escalate. I orchestrated a small, seemingly accidental moment of miscommunication between Adrian and Elena that I had planted. A medical form was slightly misfiled, a note intentionally misworded, just enough to create confusion and frustration. "I don't understand," Elena said softly, her voice tinged with panic. I thought everything was ready. "Sometimes," I said quietly, almost conversational, "what we expect isn't what we receive. It's the unpredictability that teaches us most." Her eyes darted to me, uncertainty and fear intermingling. She realized, too late, that I was no longer just an obedient caretaker. She was vulnerable, exposed, and she knew it. Adrian entered the room moments later, and the shift in dynamics was palpable. His gaze moved from Elena to me, sharp and questioning. "What happened here?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of authority and tension. "A small miscommunication," I replied calmly, neutral. "It's being corrected." His eyes lingered on Elena, searching for answers. She faltered, hesitated, and for the first time, I saw fear in her expression. She realized her manipulations had failed, that she was no longer in control, and that realization terrified her. That night, I laid the groundwork for the next phase of my revenge. I created subtle opportunities for Adrian to witness Elena's vulnerability firsthand, orchestrating small coincidences that would amplify his doubts. Every reaction he had, every twitch of frustration or concern, I catalogued and used to my advantage. Over the next few days, the tension escalated. Adrian's obsession with control made him predictable. Elena's insecurities made her malleable. And I remained calm, composed, and calculating. I allowed them to believe they were still orchestrating events, while in reality, every move was dictated by me. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, a small incident that would cement the shift in power. I arranged for Elena to experience a minor but frightening medical scare, orchestrated in a way that would leave her dependent on both Adrian and me. She panicked, cried out, and Adrian rushed to her side, his control momentarily cracking. I stood back, observing silently, letting the chaos unfold exactly as I had planned. Every reaction, every emotion, every falter reinforced the position I had worked so carefully to build. By the end of that night, the balance had shifted irreversibly. Elena's confidence was shattered, Adrian's obsession had become his vulnerability, and I was the only one fully in control. As I left the hospital, the night air cool against my skin, I whispered to myself, a promise of what was to come. They thought they could control me. They thought they could manipulate the outcome. But the storm has begun, and soon they will learn that the one they underestimated is the one who decides their fate. The first major turning point had been achieved. The pieces were falling into place, and the revenge I had been meticulously planning was about to unfold in full force. The tension in the hospital had reached a tipping point. Every glance, every word, every subtle gesture now carried weight. Adrian and Elena were both teetering on the edge of realization, and I had become the unseen hand guiding their every falter. It was late afternoon when I decided to escalate the final phase. Elena had grown frail not physically, but emotionally. Her once sharp confidence had dulled, replaced by hesitation and fear. She no longer challenged me openly. Instead, she whispered questions and looked to me for guidance, unaware that each interaction only reinforced her vulnerability. Adrian arrived, his usually confident aura slightly frayed. The events of the past days had rattled him. His obsession with control had made him predictable, and my manipulations had turned that predictability into a vulnerability. "She's unsettled again," he muttered, his tone tight with anxiety. "Yes," I said calmly, leaning slightly closer to Elena as if to comfort her. "She's realizing that some things are beyond control." His eyes flicked toward me, suspicion in his gaze, but he didn't understand the subtle trap I had laid. He believed he was still orchestrating events, still guiding outcomes, but in reality, every reaction he had was exactly what I anticipated, exactly what I wanted. I allowed Elena to falter during a routine check, orchestrating a small incident that seemed accidental but was perfectly timed. She panicked, and Adrian rushed to her side, worry etched across his face. "What happened?" he demanded, his composure cracking for the first time. "Just a momentary lapse," I replied, neutral, calm. "Nothing serious." But inside, I knew it was serious, the first true exposure of vulnerability, both for Elena and for Adrian. They were beginning to see the cracks, but they still didn't understand the source. That was the beauty of the plan: invisibility, patience, precision. That evening, I staged a confrontation that would cement the shift in power. I allowed Adrian to overhear Elena admitting, in her own words, that she had relied too much on manipulation, that she had misjudged him, that she had underestimated me. "You think you can control everything," she whispered, panic in her voice. "But I don't know." Adrian froze, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. For the first time, he realized that the carefully constructed web he thought he had spun was unraveling, and that I was the one holding the scissors. I stepped forward, calm and composed, my voice soft but deliberate. "Sometimes, the ones you underestimate are the ones who hold the real power." His gaze flicked to me, comprehension dawning slowly. He realized, too late, that the obedient wife he had believed would act out of duty was the one orchestrating every moment, guiding every reaction, controlling every outcome. Elena's panic intensified as she recognized her own vulnerability. I didn't expect this," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I thought I could handle it." "You did handle it," I said gently, almost tenderly. "But not in the way you imagined." For the first time, both of them saw clearly the power I had amassed, the patience, the strategy, the subtle manipulations that had guided every reaction, every fear, every doubt. By the end of the night, the reckoning was undeniable. Elena's confidence had been shattered completely. Adrian's obsession had become a liability, and I stood calm, composed, victorious. I had not needed to raise my voice, to act with force, or to make threats. The revenge had been subtle, invisible, perfect in its precision. And in that quiet, victorious moment, I realized something profound. Control was not about aggression. Control was about patience, understanding, and strategy. and I had mastered all three. As I left the hospital that night, the city lights glowing softly, I whispered into the darkness, "The storm is over." But the lesson is eternal. Never underestimate the one you think is powerless. Because sometimes, the one who obeys quietly is the one who decides your fate. The hospital had returned to its quiet hum, but the tension that had once ruled the room had shifted entirely. The balance of power, once assumed by Adrian and Elena, was now unmistakably mine. They had glimpsed the extent of my strategy, my patience, my control, and neither would ever forget it. Elena sat in her bed, her posture slumped, her eyes heavy with the realization of her defeat. No amount of charm or manipulation could undo the cracks I had so carefully exposed. She glanced at me, fear mingled with reluctant respect. I didn't think you could see it all," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. I thought I had control. I approached her slowly, letting my presence loom just enough to be commanding without threatening. "Control is an illusion," I said gently, "and sometimes the one who seems weakest is the one holding all the levers." Her lips parted, but no words came. She finally understood my calm demeanor, my calculated patience, my silent obedience. All of it had been strategy. I had played the long game, and now she was forced to watch the results. Adrian, meanwhile, had become restless. His obsession with control had blinded him, and now that he glimpsed the truth, his frustration was palpable. He tried to assert authority, to reclaim some semblance of power, but every move he made only reinforced the reality. I was in command. You've been manipulating us this whole time," he said, his voice taut with disbelief. "How? Why?" "Not manipulating," I replied softly, calmly. "Guiding, observing, responding to your own actions. You both assumed control, but in truth, it was never yours to hold." He stared at me, eyes wide, struggling to reconcile his arrogance with the truth. And I allowed him that struggle, letting the tension linger. There was no need to push him further. The understanding of his own helplessness was far more powerful than any confrontation I could stage. Elena, still trembling, finally spoke. What do you want from us?" I paused, letting the silence stretch. "Nothing," I said softly. "Only for you both to understand that power is not about fear, control, or manipulation. It's about strategy, patience, and understanding. And you underestimated me." The realization hit them both like a cold wave. Every glance, every whisper, every subtle misstep they had made had been orchestrated to reveal their weaknesses. And now, there was nothing left to conceal. Over the following days, the hospital continued its routine, but the dynamic had irreversibly changed. Adrian's obsession became a quiet tension. He no longer approached me with the same overconfidence. Elena's confidence crumbled, leaving her hesitant, dependent, and acutely aware of her own vulnerabilities. I remained calm, composed, professional, obedient in appearance, yet commanding in reality. Every interaction reinforced the lesson they had learned. Never underestimate the quiet, the patient, the observant. The one who obeys may be the one who ultimately controls the outcome. And as I walked away from the hospital each night, I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of triumph that required no celebration, no vengeance expressed in force. The revenge had been perfect, subtle, precise, and irreversible. "They will remember this," I whispered into the night, a vow echoing softly. Not because of anger or cruelty, but because of strategy, patience, and foresight. They underestimated me, and that was their greatest mistake. The storm had passed. The lesson had been delivered. And in the quiet aftermath, I finally allowed myself to feel a sense of closure and of control that would never be challenged again. The hospital had returned to its quiet routine. But the energy in the room had irrevocably changed. Adrian's overconfidence had been tempered by realization. Elena's arrogance had been replaced by a humbling uncertainty. And I had emerged not only unscathed but victorious. Having transformed a situation of manipulation and cruelty into one of control and justice, I walked the corridors with calm precision, moving with the same quiet grace I had wielded throughout the ordeal. My patience, my observation, my subtle strategies had not only protected me but reshaped the dynamics around me. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered comment had been intentional. Every action had been a move in a game I had been quietly mastering. Elena sat in her room, still recovering, her posture slumped in a way that reflected the understanding of her defeat. She no longer attempted subtle manipulations. Her eyes held a mixture of fear, respect, and reluctant acknowledgement. She had learned a lesson she would never forget. The one who seems powerless may, in truth, hold all the cards. Adrian, too, had begun to see the consequences of his obsession and arrogance. His attempts at control had faltered under the subtle yet precise orchestration of events I had quietly commanded. He now moved with caution, aware that the quiet, calm presence of someone underestimated can wield power in ways he had never imagined. I took a quiet moment to reflect on the journey. Revenge, I realized, does not always require aggression or confrontation. It can be executed with patience, strategy, and psychological insight. True power lies in observation, precision, and the ability to act when the moment is perfect. They will never forget this, I whispered softly to myself. Not because of anger or cruelty, but because of awareness, strategy, and the strength to act wisely. They underestimated me, and that was their downfall. As I left the hospital for the final time, the cool night air brushing against my face, I felt a sense of closure I had never experienced before. The storm had passed, the game had ended, and I had won not through force, but through foresight, patience, and an unwavering sense of purpose. In that quiet triumph, I understood something profound. Power is not always visible. Strength does not always roar. And those who appear weakest may, in truth, be the ones who control fate itself. The night embraced me, calm and serene, a perfect reflection of the victory I had claimed. And in that victory, I found not only justice but the unwavering certainty that I would never again be underestimated. The lesson was complete. The revenge was perfected. And the one who had been forced, manipulated, and underestimated had emerged unshakable, victorious, and fully in control. All right, everyone, that's all I have for today. If you found this entertaining, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. Don't forget to comment your thoughts regarding this story. If you want to watch more, please check out our playlist. Finally, a huge thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.